Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Stories about those who are pleased. Al-Husayn narrated to us and said, Abdullah narrated to us and said, Muhammad ibn al-Husayn narrated to me and said, Muhammad ibn Muawiyah ibn al-Azraq narrated to me and said, a sheikh of ours narrated to us and said, Yunus and Jibreel alayhi salam met. So Yunus said, O Jibreel, point me towards the person upon earth who worships the most. He said, so he brought him to a man whose hands had been cut off due to leprosy, and he was saying, let me enjoy them however you want, and take them from me however you want, and he have let hope in you remain in me, O you who are kind to me, O you who are generous. Then Yunus said, O Jibreel, I verily asked you to show me someone who fasts a lot and prays a lot in the night. Jibreel said, verily this man was like that before the affliction, and I have verily been commanded to take away his sight. He said, then he pointed towards his two eyes with his finger, and they were taken away. Then he, i.e. the man, said, let me enjoy them however you want, and take them from me however you want. And you have let hope in you remain in me, O you who are kind to me, O you who are generous. Then Jibreel said, come and invoke, and we will invoke along with you, so that your hands, your feet, and your sight will be returned to you, and then you can return to the worship which you used to perform. He said, I would not love that. He said, and why is that? He said, if what he loves is in this, then his love is more beloved to me than that, i.e. getting this back. He said, then Yunus alayhi salam said, O Jibreel, O Allah, have you ever seen any person who worships more than him? Then Jibreel said, O Yunus, there is no way better than it, i.e. being pleased with his decrees that leads more to the pleasure of Allah. Al-Husayn narrated to us and said, Abdullah narrated to us and said, Al-Hasan bin Yahya bin Kathir al-Anbari narrated to me from Khuzaymah Abu Muhammad, the worshipper, who said, a prophet from the prophets passed by a man who has been driven away by his family due to affliction. So he said, O Lord, the slave of yours, if only you would change his situation. So Allah revealed to him and to ask him if he would love for me to change his situation. So he said to him, O you, would you not love for Allah to change your situation from this to something other than it, i.e. something better? Then the man said, I am leaving the choice of this to Allah. Al-Husayn narrated to us and said, Abdullah narrated to us and said, Muhammad ibn al-Husayn narrated to me and said, Ubaydullah ibn Muhammad al-Taymi narrated to me and said, our companions narrated to us from the narrators who said, Musa stood up from among Banu Israel and delivered an excellent sermon, so he thought highly of it. Then Banu Israel said to him, is there anyone among you, among the people who are more knowledgeable than you? He said, no. He said that Allah revealed to him that there among the people is someone who is more knowledgeable than you. He said, O Lord, who is more knowledgeable than me when you verily have given me the Torah, and in it there is knowledge about everything. He said that Allah revealed to him, more knowledgeable than you is a slave among my slaves whom I made to carry the message, and then I sent him to a stubborn tyrant king. He, i.e. the king, then cut off his hands and feet, and he cut off his nose, and I gave him back what was cut off from him. Then I sent him back to him, i.e. the king, once more as a messenger, and he was saying, I am pleased for myself with what you are pleased for me with. And he did not say like you said at the first feeling of fear, فَأَخَافُ أَن يَقْتُلُونَ, so I am afraid that they will kill me. Ash-Shu'ara 26:14. Al-Husayn narrated to us and said, Abdullah narrated to us and said, Ibrahim ibn Sa'id al-Jawhari narrated to me and said, Abu Usama narrated to us and said, Al-A'mash narrated to us from Muslim, from Masruq, who said, there was a man living in in the desert who had a dog, a donkey, and a rooster. The rooster would wake them up for the prayer. They would use the donkey to move water, and it would carry their tent, and the dog would protect them. He said, then a fox came and took the rooster, so they were saddened by the disappearance of the rooster, and he was a righteous man, so he said, perhaps this is something good. Then they remained as such for as long as Allah wanted. Then a wolf came and split open the stomach of the donkey and killed it, so they were saddened by the disappearance of the donkey. Then the righteous man said, perhaps this is something good. Then they remained as such for as long as Allah wanted after this. And then the dog was afflicted. Then the righteous man said, perhaps this is something good. Then after this they remained as such for as long as Allah wanted. Then one day they woke up and they looked around and they saw that everyone around them had been taken captive and only they remained free. He said, and they had verily taken the others due to what occurred from them of sound and noise, while they, i.e. the righteous man and his family, had nothing that attracted attention. Verily their dog, their donkey, and their rooster had all disappeared. And Hussein narrated to us and said, Abdullah narrated to us and said, Ahmed ibn Ibrahim ibn Kathir al-Abadi narrated to me and said, Khalaf ibn al-Walid narrated to us from Abdurrahman ibn Zayd ibn Abi al-Hawari, from his father, from Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib, who said, Luqman said to his son, never let any affair befall you that you either are pleased with or displeased with, except that you establish in your conscience that this is something good for you. He said, as for this, then I am not capable of giving it to you, i.e. to fulfill and believe in it, without me knowing that what you have said is as you have said it is. He said, O my son, verily Allah has verily sent a prophet, so come on, let us go to him, for he verily has clarification of what I have said to you. He said, take us to him. He said, so he, i.e. Luqman, went out while he was upon a donkey, and his son was upon another donkey. And they took suitable provisions with them. Then they proceeded for days and nights until they reached a desert. So they took their equipment for traveling through it, and then they entered it. Then they proceeded as long as Allah wanted for them to proceed until they reached the time of midday. The day was at its high while the heat had become severe, and the water and provisions had run out, and their 2 donkeys had become slow. So Luqman descended and his son descended as well, and they began pulling on their riding animals. And as they were as such, Luqman looked to his front and saw some blackness and smoke. So he said to himself, the blackness is a tree and the smoke is civilization and people. And as they were as such, the son of Luqman stepped on some bones embossed in the road, and it, i.e. the bone, entered the bottom of his foot and came out from the top of it. So the son of Luqman fell down unconscious, and Luqman happened to turn around and he saw his son collapsed. So he jumped to him and embraced him to his chest and pulled out the bone with his teeth. Then he took off a turban he was wearing and dressed his foot in it. Then he looked at the face of his son, and his eyes were flowing with tears. Then one of the drops from his tears fell upon the cheek of the boy. So he, i.e. the son, became aware of it and looked at his father while he was crying. And he said, O my father, you are crying while you say this is good for me. How can this be good for me when you are crying and there is no more food and water, and you and I remain in this place? So if you go and leave me in this situation, you will leave with worries and grief for as long as you are gone. And if you stay with me we will both die. So how could this possibly be good for me when you are crying? He said, as for my crying, O my son, then I wish that I could ransom you from this situation with all of my share of dunya. But I am a father, and for me is the softness of a father. And as for what you said, how can this be good for me? Then perhaps whatever has been removed from you, O my son, is greater in harm than what you have been afflicted with, and perhaps is what you have been afflicted with easier than that what has been removed from you. Then as he was speaking to him, Luqman looked to the front of him, and he no longer saw the smoke and blackness. So he said to himself, I cannot see anything. Then he said, I verily saw it, but perhaps has my Lord made something occur by what I have seen? And as he was thinking about this, he looked to his front, and there was a person that had approached upon a black and white horse. He was wearing white clothes and a white turban, and he was passing through the air as he was approaching, and he continued to look at him with his eyes until he was close to him. Then he disguised himself from him, and then he yelled at him, and he said, Are you Luqman? He said, Yes. He said, Are you the Hakim, wise one? He said, This is said, and this is how my Lord has described me. He said, What did your son say to you, that fool? He said, O slave of Allah, who are you? I hear your speech, but I do not see your face. He said, I am Jibreel. No one sees me except an angel brought near or a sent prophet. And had it not been for this, you would verily have seen me. So what did your son say to you, that fool? He said, Luqman said in himself, If you are Jibreel, then you know that you know what my son said better than me. Then Jibreel alayhi salam said, I have nothing to do with your affair except that I have protected you. Then they came to me while my Lord had commanded me to cause this city and whatever is around it to sink down in the ground. And they informed me that you two are looking to enter the city. So I invoked my Lord to withhold you from me by whatever reason He wanted. And Allah withheld you from me by what He afflicted your son with. And had it not been for what your son was afflicted with, then I would have caused you to sink along with those whom I caused to sink into the ground. He said that Jibreel wiped his hand over the foot of the boy, and he got up standing, and he wiped his hand over that in which there was food, so it became filled with food, and he wiped his hand over that in which there was water, so it became filled with water. Then he carried them and their 2 donkeys, and he sent them through the air just as a bird is sent, and then they were at the house from which they came out from after some days and nights. The hadith of Umar ibn al-Khattab regarding being pleased. And Hussein narrated to us and said, Abdullah narrated to us and said, Ali ibn al-Ja'd narrated to us and said, Ibn Uyayna informed us from Abu Sawda, from Abu Mijlis Lahiq ibn Humayd, who said Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anh said, I do not care about which state I wake up in, if it is in accordance with what I love or in accordance with what I hate, because I do not know if goodness lies in what I love or in what I hate. Some of the states of the people of Rida in the hereafter. And Hussein narrated to us and said, Abdullah narrated to us and said, Muhammad ibn Hussein narrated to me and said, Hakim ibn Ja'far narrated to me, Hakim ibn Ja'far narrated to me and said, I heard Abdullah al-Barathi say, whoever is bestowed with Rida, being pleased, he has verily reached the best of ranks or levels. And Hussein narrated to us and said, Abdullah narrated to us and said, Muhammad ibn Hussein narrated to us and said, Miskin ibn Abdullah narrated to me and said, I heard Haddab say, some of the worshippers said to me, if you are pleased no matter what you are given, then the account regarding what you are given will become lighter. And Hussein narrated to us and said, Abdullah narrated to us and said, Suraj ibn Yunus narrated to me and said, Marwan ibn Muawiyah narrated to us from an old man from the people of Basra, from Malik ibn Dinar, from Al-Hasan, who said, whoever is pleased with Allah when He provided with a small provision, then Allah will be pleased with him, even if He only meets him with few deeds. And Hussein narrated to us and said, Abdullah narrated to us and said, Muhammad ibn Idris narrated to us and said, Ibn Abil Hawari narrated to us and said, I heard Abdullah and Nabaji say, if he gives you anything He will give you sufficient. And if He withhold from you, He will make you pleased. Al-Husayn narrated to us and said, Abdullah narrated to us and said, Muhammad ibn Idris narrated to me and said, Ahmad ibn Abil Hawari narrated to us from Abu Abdullah al-Nabaji, who said, if you want to be a dal, righteous ascetics, then love what Allah has wanted, and whoever loves what Allah has wanted, then nothing from the decrees and judgments of Allah will befall him except that he will love it. Are you from the people of sabr, patience, and rida? Al-Husayn narrated to us and said, Abdullah narrated to us and said, Muhammad narrated to me and said, Ahmad narrated to me from Abu Abdullah Nabaji, who said, verily among the creation of Allah there are some people who are shy from having patience. If they knew its great value, then they would verily grab into it and hold it firmly. And Hussein narrated to us and said, Abdullah narrated to us and said, Muhammad ibn al-Husayn narrated to me and said, Ibrahim ibn Dawood narrated to me and said, some of the wise people said, verily Allah has some slaves who meet catastrophes with joy. They are the ones whose hearts are pure from the dunya. The people who will pass the fastest over the sirat, the path over hellfire. Al-Husayn narrated to us and said, Abdullah narrated to us and said, Muhammad ibn al-Harith al-Khazzaz narrated to me and said, Sayyar narrated to us and said, Ja'far narrated to us and said, Abdul Samad ibn Maqil narrated to us from Wahab ibn Munabbih, who said, I found in the Zabur of Dawood, O Dawood, do you know who will be the fastest of people to pass over the Sirat? Those who are pleased with my judgments, and or while their tongues are moist from my remembrance. Al-Husayn narrated to us and said, Abdullah narrated to us and said, Al-Abbas ibn Yazid narrated to us and said, Ya'la ibn Abdurrahman al-Anbari narrated to us and said, Sayyar ibn Salama narrated to us and said, a man entered upon Abu al-Aliya during the sickness in which he died. So he said, verily that of it which is most beloved to me is that which is most beloved to Allah Azza wa Jal. Al-Husayn narrated to us and said, Abdullah narrated to us and said, Abu Kurayb narrated to us and said, Al-Muharibi narrated to us from Sufyan, who said, we used to visit Zubayd while he was sick, and he would say, ask Allah to be cured. So he would say, O Allah, choose for me, O Allah, choose for me. Al-Husayn narrated to us and said, Abdullah narrated to us and said, Salama ibn Shabib narrated to me and said, Sahal ibn Asim narrated to us and said, Muhammad ibn Uyayna narrated to us from Makhlad ibn Husayn, who said, in Basra there was a man who was called Shaddad. He was afflicted with leprosy, so he was cut off. Then his visitors from the companions of Al-Hasan visited him, and they said to him, how are you feeling? He said, good. He said, and as for me, that I have really not lost my part of the night prayer ever since I fell to this disease. And there is nothing that bothers me except that I am not capable of attending the prayer with the jama'ah. The good life in dunya is being pleased. Al-Husayn narrated to us and said, Abdullah narrated to us and said, Muhammad ibn Idris narrated to me and said, Amr ibn Aslam, the worshipper, narrated to me and said, I heard Abu Muawiyah al-Aswad say regarding his words, فَلَنُحْيَنَّهُ حَيَاةً طَيِّبَةً, then he will let him live a good life. An-Nahl 1697. He said, being pleased and satisfied or content. Who are those who will sit with Allah on the day of resurrection? Al-Husayn narrated to us and said, Abdullah narrated to us and said, Ibrahim ibn Musa narrated to us and said, Asad ibn Musa narrated to us with an isnad in which he ascribed the words to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, those who sit with Ar-Rahman tabaraka wa ta'ala on the day of resurrection are those who are fearful of Allah, being pleased with His decrees, humble and grateful, and who remembers Him a lot. Who from the creation are mightiest in sin? Al-Husayn narrated to us and said, Abdullah narrated to us and said, Abdurrahman ibn Yunus narrated to us and said, Hatim ibn Ismail narrated to us from Abdul Malik ibn Hassan from Muhammad ibn Ka'ab, who said, the Prophet of Allah Musa alayhi salam said, O Lord, Who from your creation is biggest in sin? He said, the one who accuses me. He said, O Lord, and does anyone accuse you? He said, yes, the one who seeks my guidance, i.e. istikhara, and that he is not pleased with what I decree for him.